Hello SCT friends, Allison Davis here with a video showing how I put together a layout based on a sketch from my upcoming online class, Design Concepts with Allison Davis. I'm using 6x6" papers for this design. So to start, I've picked out lots and lots of papers from various paper pads in a variety of both green and red. I pulled different papers from several brands, including Echo Park, Simple Stories, Honeybee Stamps, Bella Boulevard, and My Favorite Things. To build the design, I'm going to cut out several strips. For the green papers, I don't need as many as I do of the red, nor do I need them all to be full size, since they are going to build a small frame around the main design. So I'm mostly cutting 1x1 inch pieces. Out of all the red papers, I'm cutting a bunch of 3x1 inch strips, and these are going to make up the main design of the background piece I'm creating. The core of this new design concepts class is focused on learning how to build and create a toolbox of design concepts that you can create with over and over again. The way I see it is we don't always have to reinvent the wheel. Instead, we can take a simple concept we love and make it our own with the products, the theme, and the photos, all while customizing the design to our own needs, style, and ideas. The design concept for this layout and the sketch I used is all about covering a large background shape with smaller pieces to build a unique design. The original sketch uses a similar design that I'm going to create, except on the sketch, it's on a large heart. But I had kind of a fun themed idea I wanted to play with and decided to customize the shape and design to that. I also need to cut one larger strip that is going to be the background for my title. And I'm using a larger 12x12 inch paper from Bella Boulevard for that piece. After I have all of those pattern pieces cut, now I can start building this background design. I've got two different sizes of circles that I'm going to use as the base, and I cut them both on my silhouette out of just white cardstock. I'm going to adhere the larger strip onto the smaller circle first, and then I'll kind of be building out from that. And the strip is kind of off-centered, and then I trim the pieces that are hanging off the edges. And now I can start building this pattern all over this smaller circle. The pattern is going to look like a brick pattern in the way that it's arranged. And each row of strips are offset from the one before it, and then you alternate each row. I always like to lay things out first just to make sure I like the arrangement of the patterns and to really make sure I'm happy with the overall design before I commit to it with adhesive. When I am happy with the look, I go ahead and start adhering things down. And I'm also distressing the edges of each piece with my fingernail. Since I'm placing so many smaller pieces together and they are all similar in color, I want to ensure that you can see those individual pieces and recognize that this is creating a pattern. And distressing the edges adds a little bit of dimension and some texture to the edges, and it really helps to define each piece. For this particular design concept of covering a large background shape with smaller pieces, this is the method I typically use. I start with a base shape that I have usually cut on my silhouette, and then I adhere the pieces onto that shape to create a unique, interesting, and detailed design. The fun part of this concept is just thinking of the possibilities you have. You can change up the base shape to a square, circle, heart, star, triangle, hexagon, or maybe even use a themed base like a Christmas tree or a beach ball or maybe a birthday balloon. And then you can start exploring the different ways you can cover that base shape. You can use vertical or horizontal strips like I'm using here, or you can use squares, diamonds, triangles, hexagons, or even themed shapes like leaves, flowers, baseballs, or whatever else you can dream up to fit your theme or your own unique ideas. It really is a fun concept to play with, and there are almost endless ideas on what you can do with it. So after I have all of those red strips adhered, I turn the circle over and then trim off any of the pieces that are hanging over the edges. And now I have the first part of my strips covered circle complete, and I can move on to the second circle that I'm going to create. This time I'm using the larger circle base, and I'm covering just the edges of it with the green papers. This is going to be a frame to the circle covered in red strips. I want those green pieces to be an extension of the red strips pattern. So I have adhered the red strip circle onto this larger base circle, and then I'm going to use those red strips to help me line up the green pieces. In the beginning, I thought I could get away with only those smaller 1 by 1 inch green pieces, but I quickly realized that I need some longer, full-size 3 by 1 inch strips as well. And my plan is for the green pieces to basically melt into the red pieces, so it all fits together just as if I had adhered this all on one circle. The arrangement of the green papers goes pretty fast since it's just a border. And there were a few moments on the top and bottom edges where my brain kind of struggled to comprehend where the strip needed to go to meld into the red pattern, but I figured it out pretty quickly. When I was done, I again turned the circle over and started cutting off the pieces that are hanging over the edges. I knew that I wanted to add a lot of stitching detail to this design, so I'm going to use my grid ruler to draw those pencil lines first. And I'm not going to stitch before I adhere this piece to the layout. I'm just doing this step now while it's a smaller piece to manage and I can turn easily while I'm drawing those lines. For this design, I'm going to be adding a border 1/8 of an inch from each edge of every strip. It's going to be a lot of stitching, but I really think the end result is well worth it. With all of those lines drawn, now I can adhere this whole circle piece to the center of my layout base. I'm also adhering it with a little bit of a tilt following that sketch design I was using. Now this design would also work aligned straight, but I tend to like playing with different angles and kind of mixing and matching them. So I went with the tilt just for a little fun perspective on it. Next up, I start piercing the holes for the stitching. So I start by placing my layout on a foam mat, and then I use a paper piercing tool to pierce holes along those pencil lines. Now, I actually kind of did this out of my usual order, and I think it was just because I was super excited to get this put together to see if it was a good representation of the idea that was kind of brewing in my head, and I forgot that I should put my photos on the layout before I start piercing the holes, but eventually I realized my mistake and got those photos on there. Most of the time I will adhere my photos first before I start piercing holes, simply because it's pointless to pierce those holes or stitch in the areas that are going to be covered up by those photos. So adding them first eliminates some of that time and preparation it takes to do the stitching. I adhered the photos on the left edge and they are kind of tilted and overlapped. And you can probably see from the photos where this themed idea is going. Now I'm going to add my stitching to the green frame first, and I'm using 3 strands of 6-strand embroidery floss, and I'll be using a back stitch to stitch through these holes. So 3 strands, that's always my go-to number of strands with stitching. It's so much easier to pull through the holes, and you don't notice a huge difference in the overall thickness of the stitching. Now, if you like stitching and you struggle with maybe like wrinkling or warping your paper as you stitch, you might try using 3 strands if you haven't already. When the thread is thicker, you are usually met with more resistance as you pull the thread through, and just kind of in a normal reactive response, you tend to grip the paper tighter, which gives you those wrinkled imperfections on your layout. So I highly recommend, if you haven't yet, try using 3 strands and see if it kind of fixes that potential issue. For the color of thread, I wanted it to really stand out, so I went with a darker green. The high contrast of the lighter papers with the darker thread makes that stitch detail grab your attention, and in turn, it really highlights that interesting pattern that is made with the strips. With the green stitching done, now I'm going to move on to the stitching on the red pieces. And this is a lot of piercing since there's more red covering the background design. And if you ever find you are overwhelmed by a stitch design with lots of holes to pierce, because let's face it, the piercing of the holes it's not a lot of fun. You can always break it up into sections and do a little bit at a time. Like for this design, I could pierce the holes for the bottom section, then stitch it, and then pierce the holes on the top section and then stitch that. For the color of the thread for the red sections, I did the same as I did with the green and went with a darker color of red. You'll see as I stitch this just how much that stitching enhances this pattern and really makes the detail of it stand out. It's always so incredibly satisfying to watch a larger stitch design come together, especially one like this that is on a detailed pattern. It always amazes me how well that stitching really highlights that pattern. The last stitching detail I'm going to add is some black borders along the edges of the white title background. With all that stitching completed, next I'm going to add my title. I'm using some Simple Stories foam alphabet stickers, and I'm applying them to the center of that white strip. When I started this layout, I wasn't really sure what I wanted my title to be, but I ended up using a phrase that is on that white background strip. I was hoping I had the spacing correct to fit in the middle of that strip, but I was a little off, so I did have to shift them over to the left a little for that last letter to fit, but thankfully that was super easy, not a big deal, and it all fit perfectly. Now I get to add all of the fun themed details. I'm going to add another piece to my title. I've got this little black and white strip from Bella Boulevard that was so perfect for the theme of my layout, so I adhered it with foam adhesive below my title, and I also tilted it to fit the same direction of my title. For the embellishments, I'm going to create kind of a cluster around my photos. I'm using some watermelon and heart die cuts from Bella Boulevard, and I'm adhering them with foam adhesive to add some dimension. I tend to add lots of detail with foam adhesive. I just love dimension on my layouts. And I feel like foam adhesive is important when building clusters. It helps all those individual pieces stand out while adding interest to the overall design as well. Anytime I build a cluster, I like to add some teeny tiny accents, so I'm also going to add some small enamel hearts from Doodlebug to round out this cluster design. And the last detail I'm going to add is my journaling. I've cut my journaling into strips, and I'm going to adhere them below the title. And I'm also using foam adhesive for these to ensure that that important detail stands out. And that completes my layout. It was so fun to play and create with this sketch from the Design Concepts class, and I am super excited for those of you that have signed up to see all of the sketches and layouts and lessons. I promise you will walk away with lots of new ideas and new ways of approaching scrapbook layout design. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.